Have you ever wondered what's meant by the term tritone substitution? Well, if you have, this is the lesson for you. We're going to go through what they are, what we play over them, and a very special feature that I think is really important to understand for us as sax players. So, let's get into it. So before we get into what tritone substitutions actually are, I think it's probably quite important that we look at what a tritone is in the first place. So there's several different ways of looking at the tritone. So we'll go through some different ways because it's really important in music that you have more than one way of looking at any subject. So the first way to look at it is, as the name suggests, a tritone, 3 tones. So if we start on the note C and we go up a tone to D, that's 1 tone, up another tone to E, that's 2 tones, and up another tone to F sharp, we get a tritone, C to F sharp or C to G flat. Now, interestingly, we can do the same in the other direction. So if we go C down to B flat, that's a tone, B flat down to A flat, that's a tone, and A flat down to G flat, that's another tone. Once again, C to G flat or C to F sharp. So 2 ways of looking at it from the point of view of how it's named, that tritone, 3 tones. Now, what's really interesting about it is it lies right in the middle of the octave. So if I was to start on a C in one octave and a C in the other octave, and I played up in one direction and down in the other, where my fingers would meet would be that tritone. So it's another way of visually looking at it if maybe you're looking at a piano. Now, another method of looking at the tritone is you can literally just draw a straight line intersecting the cycle of fourths or fifths. No matter where you do this, the note on the opposite side will always be the tritone. 2 other ways of potentially thinking of this, which are maybe the ways that I tend to think about it, is you can think of the interval, and the interval can be looked at as one of 2 things: a flattened fifth or a diminished fifth, or a sharp 4, also known as an augmented fourth. Both of those intervals will give you a tritone. So if I think about a fourth, so C to F, and I raise it, I sharpen it, or augment it, then I get F sharp. If I want to think of it as a flat 5, then C to G, and I flatten it, or a diminished fifth, exactly the same thing, I get G flat. Once again, the same interval. So there's several ways of thinking about getting to the tritone note, which is going to be really important in this lesson. So what is a tritone substitution, and how are we going to recognize it when we come across it on a chord chart? Well, it's pretty straightforward actually. So this is kind of level 1 of tritone substitutions. We're used to progressions like 2-5-1s. So maybe we've got a 2-5-1 in C major, and that'd be D minor 7, G7, and C major 7. Now we could also have a 2-5-1 in a minor key, let's say C minor, which would be D minor 7 flat 5 or D half diminished, G7, and then to C minor R1 minor chord. Now, you can see that the root movement moves in the cycle of fifths. It's going from D to G to C. So it's moving its way round that cycle, and that's a really strong root movement, and we see this all the time in chord progressions and in harmony. Now, although this movement's really strong, sometimes it can get actually a little bit boring if we've just got endless fifths moving in the bass. Now, there's a couple of ways of getting from the D minor chord all the way to that C major chord. And we can use the cycle of fifths as we've already discussed, but there's another even more obvious route actually, and that's to move chromatically. So instead of going D, G, C, we could go D, D flat, C. Now let's think about the difference between these two versions. So in our first version, we've got G7, and in our second version, we've got D flat 7. And what is the distance between those two root notes? Well, it's a tritone. So this is a really basic look at what a tritone substitution is. Instead of going 2, 5, 1, we're going to go 2, flat 2, 1. So we move chromatically rather than round the cycle. Now this is also a really good way to visually spot this progression. So you may be quite familiar already with the 2-5-1 progression, and this is a really good way to actually spot a tritone substitution. Your eyes are probably already used to 2-5-1 progressions, or at least used to the cycle of fourths and fifths, that movement of D to G to C to F, etc. So you're probably visually picking those up quite quickly if you've done a little bit of improvisation. So now is just a slightly different one to look for. So when you see a minor chord or a minor 7 flat 5 chord, if it was a minor 2-5-1, followed by a dominant chord, a semitone down, resolving to a 1 chord, another semitone down, then you know what you're looking at is a tritone substitution. So apart from replacing one strong root movement with another strong root movement, what's actually going on in the harmony here, and why does it still work from a harmonic point of view? So first of all, we need to understand a basic dominant chord and its function in resolving to the 1 chord. So everyone will have told you that the important notes in a dominant chord are the 3rd and the 7th. Now, what's really interesting about the interval between the 3rd and the 7th on a dominant chord is it forms a tritone itself. So on G7, the 3rd is B, and the flat 7 is the note F. B to F is already a tritone. So that's quite an interesting coincidence in the first place. Now, if I was just to play a load of tritones, what you wouldn't really get the sense of is a dominant chord. So there must be another important note here that we're missing that makes this sound more like a dominant chord in itself, and is also actually important for resolution. And strangely, it's the most basic note of them all. It's the root of that dominant chord. The note G here not only tells us that the B is a 3rd, but it also tells us that the F is that flat 7th. All the criteria we need for a dominant chord. Also, from a harmonic point of view, let's see what these notes do as they cadence to the C major chord, the 1 chord. We've actually got all 3 types of movement. The F moves down to the E chromatically, the B moves up to the C chromatically, both really strong contrary movements, and also we have 0 movement, the G remains as a G. So we've got all 3 types of cadence movement in music, something going up, something coming down, and something staying constant. The 5th doesn't really play a role, and it's one of the notes that's often missed out of voicings on dominant chords or changed in certain ways in things like altered dominant chords. Now, if you'd like to dig into tritone subs a little bit deeper, then definitely head over to Sax School. I've done an extended lesson on there where we work on some language for tritone substitutions over all 12 keys. You can download the backing track and the PDF resources that go with it. So head over there. There's a 14-day free trial. Now, when we do a tritone substitution, as we know, we're going to change the root note from G to D flat. What's really important, and particularly for us sax players, is to realise that we're not just now playing over a normal D flat 7 chord like we would do in the key of G flat major and play D flat mixolydian over it. there's something else we must remember to get a really great authentic sound and to make it basically correct from a harmony point of view. And the thing is, we need to retain all three of these original great notes. So let's just consider the third and the seventh. We've already said that the interval between them is a tritone, and obviously our chord root has moved by a tritone. So the interesting thing that happens here is the B from the G7, which was the third, becomes the flat 7 of the D flat. It's swapped places. And the F, which was the flat 7 of the G7 chord, is now the third of the D flat 7. And that's why people talk about these two notes so much, because they're really important. It's a really interesting movement. We get this tritone movement in the bass of G to D flat, and the tritone that was already in the chord, built from the third and the seventh, swap places to become the new third and seventh. And you can see why all that is really clear and important, and it sounds really strong. However, we've identified another important note here, and that was the original root, the note G, and that needs to stay also. And this G becomes what's called a sharp 11 on this new tritone substitution chord, and it's such an important sound, and it sounds great as well. Now what's kind of happened here is almost like a mirroring of the original chord. Remember I said earlier that one way of identifying the interval of a tritone was to take the cycle of fourths and fifths and just draw perfect lines through the centre, and on either side of that line would be a tritone interval. Well, it's kind of like a mirror. We're like chopping tonality in half to some degree. So if we look at our original G7 chord, just in kind of root position, and just with the important notes, so we've got this G, B, and F. If we almost flip them in the mirror, so the F now comes down to the bottom and the G goes up to the top and the B remains in the middle, you can see that the spacing changes in a really interesting way. That F has become the third, the B has become the flat 7 of the tritone substitution, and this G has gone up to the top and become a sharp 11. Now, sharp 11 dominant chords come from one place in harmony, and that is chord 4 of a melodic minor. So in the case of this particular tritone substitution, D flat 7 sharp 11, D flat is the 4th degree of A flat, so therefore the tonality, the notes we're going to play over it, will be derived from the A-flat melodic minor scale, which is basically just like an A-flat major scale, except with a minor third. And that gives us the full series of notes that we'd use for improvisation over this chord. Now, from the point of view of describing this as a modal sound or a mode, then there's a couple of different ways that this can be looked at. A lot of people call this the Lydian dominant. I'm not a fan of that description. I tend to call it the Mixolydian sharp 4 mode. So doesn't matter what we call it, that's just a way of communicating ideas. Ultimately, it's basically like a normal Mixolydian, but with the 4th raised. Now, this is particularly important for us as sax players, because remember, our job is melody, not necessarily harmony. We're outlining the harmony using melody and creating melody in our improvisations. And this sharp 11 note is where I find the majority of my students go wrong. They just look at that dominant chord and they treat it like a normal dominant chord, a 5 chord going to a 1 chord, and they'll just play a basic Mixolydian sound over it. And there's something slightly off about the overall tonality and vibe that you get from doing that. You just make this one little tweak, just add in this sharp 11 or sharp 4 within the scale, and it just sounds so authentic, and as soon as you play it, you'll go, I've heard that sound in so many jazz solos. Now, if you'd like to dig into tritone subs a little bit deeper, there's loads of stuff in Sax School for you to learn, thousands of lessons, and we've got thousands of students every day just like you learning with us, from jazz to classical, from jazz house to ska. We've got something for everybody. So head over there. There's a 14-day free trial. So until next time, take care, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.